So today's presentation is on audio, because we have a pretty interesting game so far. So far we can move left, up, down, left, right. We can even move diagonally, because that was pretty easy to implement. We can also shoot. And if we had an enemy, we could shoot the enemy. But I'm going to do a whole, like we'll spend a whole hour on enemies and stuff. But for the most part, I want to get everything else kind of working, so that implementing the enemies is just really seamless and easy. So we're going to do a little bit of audio stuff. If you've pulled down from the GitHub, I believe that there's this Kenny digital audio, or if you go into assets, audio, there should be a zip folder here, and then you can unzip it to get to the Kenny, to get all this Kenny audio stuff. We'll be using like one or two of these, but it's got a couple good stuff. But also, I downloaded the Unity Space Shooter tutorial, and I'm just going to use the background track from the Unity Space Shooter, which is a really good tutorial. I learned like so much stuff from that. But if you want to download just that, it's in resources. Yeah, so just the background sound. If you want to download this from here, it's in resources. So you can follow along. But everything else should be in the project. So we're going to do background music. We're going to do shots every time the laser gets fired. It's gonna play a sound, and then we're going to do a little bit of pitch shifting because I figured out how to do that, and it's super simple. So I'll show you how to do pitch shifting so that every time you shoot the bullet, it sounds slightly different, more randomized. So we'll learn a little bit about randomness. We'll learn a little bit about static audio, like the background noise, and then we'll learn a little bit about dynamic audio, like the zaps from the laser. So I'll do the background audio first because it's pretty straightforward. I like to kind of keep everything on its own object, on its own game object. So I'm going to create a new game object and call it audio. We'll call it background audio. All right, and then a tab it. Just reset the transform so it's at the center. It doesn't matter because it's just sound, but I like to have zeros here. It looks nice. So I'm going to add a component, and we need an audio source. So you just type in audio source, and it'll give you a whole bunch of audio stuff. The two big ones that you need to pay attention to, everything else is like advanced stuff. I don't know what any of them do. I only know what two of them do. I know what audio listener does, and I know what audio source does. So a source is what plays a sound or what emanates sound, and then a listener is what like listens for sound. So that's got to be in pair. So the main camera that default in Unity, or that comes in by default, has an audio listener on it. It has no options. It doesn't have an arrow. There's nothing here. It just accepts audio and plays it. So you can put the audio listener on anything at all. I think by default Unity puts it on the camera to get that effect where if you have like a 3D sound, like if a character is talking and you move far away, or like if you move the camera, you can change like how close or far that sound is. We're not going to be using 3D audio. We're just going to be doing 2D audio. Like it just will play sound. It doesn't matter how close or far it is. So having the audio listener on the camera is just fine. But if you ever get a situation where you can only ever have one audio listener. So here I just duplicated the main camera, and here Unity is going to complain ad infinitum that there's two audio listeners. So if you ever get that, just make sure there's only one audio listener. Two things. So to troubleshoot sound, if you don't hear anything, make sure there's an audio listener. The second thing is in your game view, there's a little button right here that says mute audio. Sometimes you'll spend 10 minutes troubleshooting your system audio, and you just have that clicked. So that button exists. Keep an eye out for it. So this is unmuted. We have an audio listener. Let's get some music playing. So background audio is a game object. It has an audio source on it. For the most part, the only things that we're going to pay attention to is audio clip. This is the sound that gets played. We've got a couple other options, but let's load this up. So I want to have the background music. I'm just going to drag it in. Pretty easy. This PlayOn awake. So this means that when the game starts, the sound will automatically be playing. It's not on a trigger or something. It's not like a button where it only plays when you push it. Just as soon as this object exists, it will begin playing its sound. It also has a loop. So when it finishes, just begin right away. And then you can change the volume. You can change the pitch, which we'll do dynamically. stereo pan is for like, is it in the left ear or the right ear or both? But for the most part, in this 2D game, you get all the sound all the time. And if you want to get advanced, the 3D sound is right here. So that's like, if you want to have like a character talking, and if you walk away from them, they get quieter. All of those settings are down there. But in this 2D game, we're not going to mess with those. So we have our audio source, and we added the clip, and it's going to play on awake, and it's going to loop. So if we play this, and if my audio is working, we should hear some sound. Let me check this out. Creston. Oh yeah, space music. Cool. So we can play audio. We just have to have an audio source in the scene with the clip loaded, and then if it's not play on awake, we have to trigger it somehow. So that's background audio. Any questions about this much so far? Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You just put it in the scene and you make sure it's all linked up, and it just works. But now I want that whenever the player shoots a bullet, I want it to play sound. So that is going to be a player on the player script. So I've got the player. I'm going to create this. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio. So we need the same tool. The player, it's going to play sound, so it also needs an audio source. And which clip is it going to play? Let's just do laser 1. And if you click on laser 1, you can play a preview down here. Yeah, so you don't have to boot up like a VLC or anything. You can test it inside. So I loaded the clip. I don't want it to play on awake. I want it to only play when I press the button, and it's not going to loop. The pressing the button is what activates it. So that's really all that it needs. But we need something in the script to trigger it. So in the player controller script, this pattern will look very familiar because this is a component, the audio source. It's a component in Unity, and we have to access it. So you've seen this pattern before. So I'm going to have a member components, and it's going to be public. What is it? It's an audio source, and you can name it whatever you want. I have a convention where I name it my audio source. I use the my as like an identifier to tell me that it's connected to this game object. Like it's on. Like it's not like something that I had to go look for and then get. Like it's on the same object. So you can name it whatever you want, but I like the my convention. You might see it if you look at Unity stuff. You might see an underscore. That kind of means the same thing. It's just you can expect that it's attached. So we need so now this bucket holds an audio source, but we need to fill it. So we can do that if we come back here. It's right here under my audio source. So we can drag the player in, and that's Unity smart enough to look for the audio source, so you can drag it in there. And that works. That's totally cool. But I'm not super thrilled on that, because every time I make this, like I have to manually drag that in. That is a way to do it. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm a programmer, so I'll show you the pragmatic approach to this. So instead of public, I'm going to make it private. And I'm doing it this way because it's guaranteed. If this game, if this player is in the scene, it's going to have a sound. Like we use the word dependency. The player is dependent on the audio source. There's always a player. There's always an audio source. So I'm going to do. Yeah, I'll use start. Why not start? So when the game begins, I need to load this audio source. So I'm going to say my audio source is equal to. And this.gameObject. So this is this script. GameObject is the GameObject that it's attached to. And then I'm going to use the GetComponent pattern. So GetComponent needs a type in angled brackets, and then it uses no parameters. So we covered this once before, but the angle brackets, they're very, you don't see them very often, but if you do see angle brackets, you give it a type on the inside. It's a generic function. So when the game begins, it's going to look on its game object for an audio source and put it there. So for the rest of the game, we can assume that there is an audio source and we have a reference to it. All right, so now we need to trigger this audio source. So we've already got a function for it. We called it do shooting. So I thought that was pretty cool that because we've already got the function laid out, we already know exactly where to put this code. So we can say when the bullet is fired, we're going to say my audio source dot, I think it's just play. Yeah, play. So all we had to do was give it a reference, was declare that this, first we declared that this player controller has a reference to an audio source. We filled that reference in start, and start is called at the very beginning of the game, so we only had to do that once. And then now audio source, we just have to play it. So let's let Unity recompile, run. Cool, so that works. Let me mute the audio, mute this real quick. Sweet, so what do you guys notice about this, about the audio for this? See, what's up? Real loud. It is kind of loud, but I want you to kind of listen to what's happening. So I shoot once, you can hear the whole thing, right? It's kind of got an echo. But if I shoot it a whole bunch, you kind of hear what I'm trying to show you. It interrupts itself every time you shoot, so it doesn't finish the clip, and then it doesn't play two at the same time. It just kind of restarts the first one. Usually that's fine, but in this case, that doesn't sound great, right? As far as like a game feel, it's very clear that in what world does the lasers stop making a noise as soon as another laser gets created? So as it turns out, having one audio source on the player, not the best implementation. Maybe for something that happens once, like an explosion, or maybe if the player has some voice dialogue that gets played or something, that might work, because very rarely does one player, or does very rarely does voice overlap with each other. So for some cases this works, but in this case, I don't think the player is the best place to put the laser sound. What's a better place, or what's a different place to put the laser sound? Oh, you raised your hand. What's up? The laser itself? Yeah, that's a good place. Any other suggestions? A projectile? The projectile itself? All right. Yeah, so that is a good solution. So we could put on the laser itself. That works because as long as the laser's lifetime is as long as the laser sound, then that'll work. And that's what we'll do. There's a different solution, which is you could have a parent, an audio game object that has 10 audio sources, and then it just chooses which one to play, which I think is the amazing, the best, fantastic solution. But I don't want to do that. It's a lot of work. So let's do the projectile, the bullet. That'll for our purposes, that'll work wonderfully. So all that work we did with the player is kaput, unfortunately. So let me pull up my GitHub, and I'm just gonna can that really easily. So player controller, all that stuff is goodbye. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so same kind of deal, but let's do it on the laser, the projectile controller. So I'm going to do the same thing. Member components. This is a private audio source, my audio source. I'm going to get a reference to it in the start function, so I only have to do it once. I can type so fast because I hit tab every so often. That's why I'm auto-completing. What's up, Jared? Yeah, it's a good idea. Very good idea. So, right. So on the, so Jared, you said have it play on awake when it spawns. So that is a good implementation of it. So on the projectile, this is the prefab. So if we change this, it'll affect all projectiles. So and this is in the project assets prefabs. So I'm going to add a component, audio source. And in this case, yeah, Jared, I'm going to leave play on awake clicked. I'm going to leave that, and then I'm going to fill this clip with laser 1. So created an audio source, added the clip so it knows what to play. I'm going to leave play on awake as true because this kind of fits what we're doing with the lasers. And then in the script, yeah, so, I mean, I guess that's kind of the same thing. I guess we just put that here. My audio source. No, I don't think we need anything else. I think that's all you need, because it's got PlayOn awake. Yeah, that'll do. So let's let us run it. Let's see what happens now. So that still works. Sounds a lot better, right? So there's like overlapping, it gets louder when you shoot more, so that builds kind of tension. So when you get tense and start shooting, the sound, it also gets more tense and shoots. So I think that's pretty cool. That sounds a lot better. Interesting. The lives disappeared. But yeah, so this, so that's a much better solution. So we used PlayOn. So we did take advantage of the PlayOn awake, so that as soon as this object exists, it plays its noise. So that works really well with the instantiate. But I wanna think forward for just a little bit. So it's kind of expensive what we're doing. Every time we're calling instantiate. Every time we shoot a bullet, it creates a brand new object from scratch. So which means Unity has to create the game object. Like it's already got a copy, so it already knows what to make, but it has to create it, add a transform, add this, add this, add this, add all these things every time it gets created. That's, for our purposes, it's not a big deal, but over if you're playing a bullet hell game where you're shooting 1,000 of those things a moment, that's a lot of processing power that you could be using elsewhere. Can anybody think of a solution instead of instantiating or creating a new object every time we shoot? Is there a different solution we could do for that? Yeah, what's up?
Reuse objects?
Yeah, we can reuse them. So I guess the general concept is we call that object pooling. And yeah, that is exactly right. So we can reuse them. So everything has this button. You've seen me use it once or twice. This one up here, it's the enable and disable button. So yeah, enabling and disabling is super cheap. You don't have to delete everything and then re-instantiate it. It just pays attention to it or stops paying attention to it. Or if it's disabled, it doesn't run update. It doesn't acknowledge it in any way, but it still exists. It's still in memory. So you don't have to take it out and then put it back in and then take it out and put it back in every time. So I'm not going to do object pooling today because that's a little bit extra. That's got to do with lists and queues and stuff. But the idea is that we would, when the game starts, you would instantiate 10, 20, 50 bullets, as many as you think you'd need, and then you just cycle through and you turn them on and then turn them off and then turn them on and then turn them off and reset their position. So I kind of want to give you the framework, and this will kind of give us a little bit more ideas on how, or like, it'll give us a little bit more use cases out of the audio. So let's say that our bullet. So right now we're using start. So when the game starts, it finds its audio source, and then let's turn this off for now, because let's just assume that we're doing the object pool, so it doesn't ever get destroyed. We'll figure out how to destroy it later, or rather, instead of destroying it, it'll turn it off. So we need a different function for this, and we're going to call, or it's called OnEnable, and it pairs, or it has a sister function called void OnDisable. So notice they're blue. That means that they're Unity callbacks, which means that Unity calls these functions. So notice we never call start, we never call update. Those just kind of happen. Same thing with those triggers that we were using before. So OnEnable and OnDisable, you never call those. They just Unity calls those when certain events happen. So OnEnable, OnDisable. I'll just debug it so you can see when that happens. Whoops. Debug.log OnEnable. And then on disable. Yeah. So in Unity, I think it's on the projectile. Let me put these on the player just so it's a little bit easier. So just for demonstration purposes, I put the OnEnable, OnDisable on the player. Play the game, audio is muted. So notice OnEnable has been called when the game starts, and then when I turn them off, he's disabled, turn them on, he's enabled, turn them on. So these are built-in callbacks or like events that you can, we can use these. So maybe instead of, so if we're going to reuse a bullet, let's not use onAwake, because it's always awake. We just need to turn it on or off. So instead of, let's use this OnEnable stuff. So we're not going to do anything on disable. But here, let's do my audio source. No, my audio. This is on the player. Whoops. Back to the projectile. .play. Okay, so I think we're going to get the exact same behavior where it makes a noise when it plays. Or not. Play on awake, play, audio source .play, start, GetComponent, OnEnable. I'll come back to that. Or I'll troubleshoot another time. But we should get the same behavior. One other thing I forgot to do was pitch shifting. I'll double back to that. But I want to show that what's up, Jared? But OnEnable also gets called upon instantiation. So we can do, that's a good point. Let's prove it and just make sure that OnEnable is actually firing. Audio source.play, minus source, projectile, you've got the laser, projectile, laser, play, volume. Play awake? No reference, OnEnable. Interesting. Oh, I see. Okay. Excellent. Oh, actually, this is great. This leads me on. This leads me to my next topic. So, what's happening? Why didn't that work? Let's double check it. So, start is where my audio source gets pulled. So when the game starts, this audio source is when it actually fills the bucket. So let's go back into the console and let's turn these debugs off. No reference exception. This is why I wasn't firing. OnEnable. So OnEnable is, so when I enable the game, when I enable the object, it should play it. But it's not. It's saying that there's a missing reference. So it sounds like I have a race condition where one thing is happening before, or one thing is trying to play the audio source before it's even filled. So I did want to talk about this. So this is a good lead-in. So let's do start. Let's do OnEnable. And there's one other function which they don't bring up right away, but it's OnAwake. Awake, yeah. Debug.log OnAwake. Excellent. So these are the initialization functions. We've got awake, we've got start, we've got OnEnable. So let's just turn this off for now and turn this off for now. So I just want to debug, I just want to log when these functions are being called. There's awake, there's start, and there's OnEnable. So let's run it. Let's shoot the thing. Nope, none of them are called. Because projectile controller, OnAwake, debug, start. Oh, right, because I turned it off. There they are. Sorry, you can turn off like which ones you want to see. So now I've enabled debugs. So here's my OnAwake, OnEnable, and start. So this is what I wanted to show. So OnAwake was the first thing that was fired, and then OnEnable happened. So that's and then start. So I had my gather audio source right here in start. So OnEnable happens before start. So this is called the Unity execution order. And if we Google that term, we can see a whole chart dedicated to this. So I love charts. So here, this is, if you just Google Unity execution order, you can get here, or you can get to it from the Unity website. But what I'm trying to point out is this is the order that those blue functions get called. So notice here, these results are exactly what we saw. Awake happens first, then OnEnable, then start. I don't ever use reset, you can ignore that. Fixed updates for physics, on trigger enter, on collision enter, then your coroutine yields. So this just gives you the order that things get called. So notice update happens, then some other yields, GUI, late update, on disable, on destroy, right? So that is something worth noting. On destroy is the very last thing that happens in a frame. Yeah, I lost like a whole day on this, on not knowing that this was the very last thing that happened. But I digress. So we have a race condition. So it's really easy to fix. It turns out that start isn't the best place to do resource gathering or reference gathering. OnAwake is the best place to do that. And I wish that when you do, that Unity would show OnAwake when you made a new script, but it doesn't. You have to know that that exists. So OnAwake is good for gathering references, and then start is good for like communicating with those references. So the idea is that everybody, gathers everything that they need in a wake, and then start is where you say, okay, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, and start to actually talk to each other. And then from then on, you should be good. So in awake, we gather our reference to the object, and then now on enable, we're going to play the object, or play the sound. And then back in Unity, on enable, play the sound, back in Unity. I'm going to turn off the play on awake. Save it, play it, and so now we should get those sounds. There we go. So that is the expected behavior. So it's doing the exact same thing as play on awake, but this way we can reuse the bullet, and every time it gets enabled, it'll play the sound instead of having to instantiate it every time, because that's kind of expensive. Did I lose anybody there? Is everyone kind of still following along? Any questions? What's up? Still used to use what? Yeah, so will we have to use, if we're doing the pooling process, will we have to use start? Start only gets called once. So that's why I chose to do OnEnable. So if we put this, so if we played the sound in start, the first time you build it, it would play the sound. Oh, the gather reference? No. So what we found before was that, if we gather the audio, if we gather the reference in start, OnEnable gets called before start. So the start function itself only gets called once when an object is created. Same thing with OnAwake. So if we're doing the object pooling, and you turn it off, then you turn it on, and then you turn it off and turn it on, if you have it play in start like this, it won't work because OnEnable happens first, which is why I recommend, or why we have to put it into the awake function. So OnEnable, start happens once, but OnEnable happens every time you toggle the object on and off using this button, this one up here. The pragmatic way to do it is this.gameObject.enabled, SetActive. Yeah, SetActive. So so the pragmatic way to turn something on or off is so true. So this SetActive function on a game object is the same thing as clicking on that box and toggling it. So we find the reference in awake. We don't need this in start. Start's more for like initialization or like talking to other, like once you've got all the references, then you can start like initializing things. And then enable is for things that need to be repeatedly or need to react to it being on or off. So like if you've got a pool of enemies and then like you've got 1,000 enemies and then you turn one on, it has to like know where the player is. So on enable, it would look for the player, update its navigation, and then go to it kind of thing. All right, so we're able to shoot the bullets. We've got it set up to where we could use object pooling to save us some runtime, and it'll work the same. But I want to do pitch shifting. So pitch shifting is changing the pitch slightly up or slightly down to kind of randomize it or make it so it's not just the same sound over and over again. So I do that in OnEnable. Yeah. So so what value do we change? Well, if we go down to the audio source, we can scroll down here. We see pitch, and it looks like we can change the value between -3 and 3, and the default is 1. Yeah. So let's just kind of. I've already tested it. I know what values are good, but why don't I show you my methodology of how I determine what's good. So I duplicated the background audio just so I could test the laser. I'm going to play it on Awaken. I'm going to loop it. So I can change the pitch a little bit. So some cursory things I notice is that as you get into negative, it like switches it. It plays it in backwards. And it also gets slower as the number gets lower, and it gets faster as the pitch increases. So you get too fast and it sounds weird. You get too low and it sounds backwards. So after tinkering, and you guys can tinker on your own time, but I've come to the conclusion that the good value is 1 and then like 1.75 or something. So I need a way to say my audio source.pitch is equal to a random value. So Unity's got a built-in function. It's just called random. And you do random.range. So random range is deprecated, so don't use that one. Just use random.range. It's from an older version of Unity, and this one's better. So we need to give it 2 values. Give me a value between this number and this number. So let's go up to the class. Let's create a header to make it look nice. Give it some fancy things. It's going to be called audio. Public float pitch min. Public float pitch max. And we'll set these to 1.8 and 1.0. When you're at the class level, you have to use the F because it's a float. I think if you don't do that, it gives you an error. No, it doesn't. All right. Sometimes you need the F, sometimes you don't. So I just always use the F if it's a float. All right. So pitch min, pitch max. Random, we want to do pitch min, pitch max. And something to note is inclusivity. So if you hover over range, it gives you a float min inclusive and max inclusive. So this means that if my number is between 0 and 1, my possible values can include 0 and can include 1. That is, I just bring this up because it's not incredibly clear, but let's do 0 and 100. Yeah, so this is the, so pitch min and pitch max, those are floats. So this is the float version of range. 0 and 100, those are ints. So this is the integer version of range. And notice now it's inclusive and exclusive. So we don't get, our numbers will be 0 to 99. We won't ever get 100. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're doing integers, like if you're doing an array, you may not get the, just make sure you know what your range is, what you're actually going to get. So integer range and float range are slightly different. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so every time I get enabled or I'm fired, then change my pitch between 1 and 1.5 or something, and then play the sound. So if we play this, I'm just going to turn off the background audio. We should just get a small variation in sound. Yeah, you kind of hear it's a little bit different now. It's a little bit higher, a little bit lower. So that just gives it a little bit of variation, gives it a little bit more personality. It's not just the same rote sound every time. It's slightly different. So yeah. All right, so that's the random function. Audio listeners. Right. So one more thing on forward thinking. Well, any questions up until this point? What's up?
Sorry about this, but the integer floats in the range.
Floats are inclusive, and the way I think about that is if I want a number between 0.1 and 0.999, like it'll give me every single like 0.999999, like it'll give you everything. But with integers, it's 0 to it's exclusive. So I remember that because when you do an array, you can give it 0 to the length, and it will always give you a valid element. You don't have to do -1 because the size is exclusive. Does that kind of help you remember it? Yeah. Right, so enemies. So in like a week or two, I want to do a whole hour just on enemies, like them firing, their movement, their timing. So I want to have the enemies have a different noise. When the enemies fire a laser, it should make a different noise when the player fires the laser. Right now, we don't have that set up. Right now, we just have it hard-coded. The projectile, we just have it loaded straight up, where this is the sound the laser makes. So I want to dynamically change the audio clip to be something depending on who's shooting it. So luckily for us, we already have an init method. It's in the projectile controller. Yeah, init, we've already got this method. So whenever someone shoots the bullet, it already tells it who owns it so that it doesn't blow up itself. So if the bullet spawns in my box, it doesn't just kill me. Like the person shooting the bullet can't get killed by their own bullet. That makes sense. So that's what the owner is, and the float is the move speed. So I can say that the player's bullets move a certain speed, but the enemy's bullets move a lot slower. So we're already kind of doing this pattern of depending on who shoots the bullet, different behavior happens. So we can just kind of add to it. So we can just say audio clip, bullet sound, or audio clip, I guess, because I'm super original with my names. So audio clip capital is the type, and then audio clip lowercase is the name that I give it so I can reference it. And then I need to set it so my audio source dot clip is equal to audio clip. So I didn't need to use the this pointer because the names are different, so it's easy. However, I use the my convention, so I already kind of know that it's where this is. So anytime I get initialized, I expect to be given a sound to play, and I'm going to load that sound, and then when I am enabled, it'll play it. So this is interesting because I think this sound will play first. Yeah. So I'll change that. Yeah, so order of operations again. I'll demonstrate it. I know you guys can follow my train of thought. So init, so this is the sound that I want to have played. And init gets called in the player function. So notice it's red. Now I need to fix it. So the player needs to have a sound. So I'm gonna move kind of fast just to get it moving. Header. You don't need headers, but they make it look pretty. Audio, private audio clip, projectile sound clip. So I created an audio clip at the class level, so now the player has a slot, and then I can just put this right in here, say comma, audio, or projectile audio. So that's all linked up, but the player needs an audio clip. Why? Oh, because I made it private, didn't I? Made it private. Public. Public so I can see it in the inspector. There it is. All right. Now let's load it up with laser 1. No, I want to demonstrate something. So laser 2. This. That sounds exactly the same. Phase 3? Something different. Excellent. Very different. 8. Okay, so what's happening now is that the player has, this is the audio clip that the player should make, or that the player sends to the projectile every time it gets, every time it shoots. And now the projectile is hopefully going to make that noise when it gets initted. Let's see if this is the case. No, no sound. Oh, projectile, laser. Oh, right, we have to, I've changed it, sorry. Dot pitch, dot play, OnEnable, clip, audio, clip. Why aren't you playing noise? Clip, play awake, laser 1, fire. No. So 8. Well, so this demonstrates what's going wrong. So does anybody have any idea? And it's kind of hidden, and you kind of have to know the execution order to know what's going on. But can anybody tell me why no sound is playing? And I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with, so here's instantiate is right here. And then here's the init method. So this goes back to the order of operations, the execution order. So what's happening? When we call instantiate, we go, yeah, so let's check this out. So when we call instantiate, we get awake. And then we get OnEnable, and then we get start. So all of these things happen before we get to this line of code. Projectile dot awake dot enable and dot start are all called right here. So this is why Instantiate is so expensive, because awake gets called, then OnEnable gets called, and then start gets called before we move on to the next round. So what's happening is that we're on Instantiate, we do awake, we do OnEnable, so the projectile plays its sound, and then in the exact same instant, we come down here and we change the projectile clip. So what's happening, why no sound is playing, is that we're saying play the sound, and then we're swapping it out, so it stops playing it because a new clip came in. Does that make sense? So our bug is coming from this init function. We're playing the sound right here, but then we're interrupting it. So this is all happening instantaneously, so we don't hear anything. So that's why nothing's happening. So what we need to do is we need to move that a little bit so that maybe this play doesn't get called in OnEnable, maybe it gets called in init instead. So I'm gonna eat my words if this isn't the case, but let's see if this works. Aha! Exactly. So excellent. So why wasn't the audio working? It was because the order of operations, because Instantiate is expensive. You do onAwake, OnEnable. OnEnable is where our audio is being called in the projectile. So here's OnEnable. There it is. And that didn't work. So you move it to an init, to the init function. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so this is good forward thinking, because once we make our enemy ship controller, which will be most of the stuff, it'll just be copy pasted. So this init function does everything we need it to do. It's the player and the so as you notice, there's only one projectile. There's not an enemy projectile and a player projectile. They just dynamically update the values to reflect who's shooting it and stuff. So our memory footprint's pretty low because we only have one object and we're just reusing it as much as possible. And then dynamically we change the values. Hey, take it easy, Jared. Thanks for coming. Cool. Any questions about all this? So this was. Oh, what's up, John? One more time. Yeah, it was. So the way I had it initially, why it wasn't working before, was that this play button, the play function was on, or was inside OnEnable. So I'm going to disable this. Gets interrupted. So the order of operations was that on the player, I said that players will make they'll make laser sound number 8, and maybe enemies will make laser sound number 7. And then on the projectile itself, it already had something. It already had laser 1, just a default. If nobody has anything, then don't do anything kind of thing. So what happens is when we do the shoot, we call Instantiate. So we haven't updated our functionality to reflect the object pool that we're kind of building towards, but so we're instantiating. And as soon as Instantiate gets called, it does all the initialization, like awake, on, enable, and start, before it continues. So we don't even get to here before all this happens. And so on enable, on the projectile, it was saying play the audio. So this is all happening like instantaneously in between a frame of code. So it's happening super quick. So we tell the audio to play this clip. And it's like, okay, I have clip number 1, I'm going to play it. And then in the same instant, just a little bit later, we change it with this init method. And the projectile, so I'm going to hit F12, and I'm going to go to it. Here it is. So this wasn't here before. And we say, okay, so play the audio clip. I have clip audio 1. Now give it audio clip number 2. And it doesn't seamlessly just like, oh, you changed my memory, I'm just going to keep playing. When you change the clip, the audio source knows to stop playing. And so in that case, it wasn't, we were telling it to play here and then immediately telling it to stop because we swapped out the audio. So to fix that, we have this afterwards in init. And then so OnEnable is not the best place for this. We do this on init. And maybe we could change the word init to be like fire projectile or something, maybe something a little bit more clear. But I like init because it's more general purpose. Does that answer your question? Excellent. So we did the pitch shifting. Yeah, and we'll use almost the exact same pattern when an enemy shoots a bullet. It'll have enemy laser or sound 3, and it'll dynamically update. So we can use the same projectile for as much as we need. We can even update it a little further, and like the player can have the sprite image, and the enemies can have a sprite image, and they can do those dynamically, and that's kind of cool too, because then, you can. So like if because I don't want to have like a regular bullet and then like a special laser bullet and then like a super special bomb. Like if the player gets like special abilities, I just want one projectile, and just depending on what variables it has, it behaves slightly differently. Cool. Any other questions? I think that's about it. That's everything I wanted to show you for today. Cool. So we learned how to do static audio. All you need is an audio source, play on awake and loop it, and that's how you get sound, or like music. And then things for like one-shots. So for one-shot audio, you have to change the clip, right? So audio, you can do a clip is equal to audio clip, and you can play it. There's also a different way to do it, is I think you can do myAudioSource.play one-shot, and then you say audio clip. It accomplishes the same thing. I don't know which one's better. I guess this one's better because it's one line of code instead of 2, but it accomplishes the same thing. You can do play one shot, or you just switch out the clip and hit play. Either way works. But yeah, cool. That's my audio presentation. Thanks for bearing with me. Thanks for being patient with me while I try to figure out why my code wasn't working.